How do you even get how do you get that built, especially with like the like the gas that comes in to knock people out?
Imagine being a contractor and walking into this guy's house and he's like, "Oh yeah, just I want this hook right here, not for any particular reason."
Do you think any gas could come out of this, or does it have to be like, what kind of gases could we use?
I finally watched. I finally watched.
I
Finally
watched. I
finally
watched.
I finally watched.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of I Finally Watched. This is David.
And this is Alain. And today we have a special guest.
Hi, I'm Taylor, and I finally watched The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
This
My
is
wife.
Taylor. This is, oh my God. So this is Taylor. I think this is your third episode? The two Oceans movies?
No,
Fourth.
this is
Fourth.
her fourth
Oh,
episode.
that's right.
I
Yeah.
did two of the Oceans movies.
Yeah, but then what was the other one? The Gosling movie.
The Notebook.
The Notebook, yes. This is a little bit, this is a love story quite different from The Notebook.
Is this a
Yeah.
love story at all? Oh, I guess a little bit.
Yeah, so we basically had to find a guest who hadn't seen it in order so that we could have an excuse to talk about it because I forget what it was the other day, but I was basically just talking about like I think this is not the best David Fincher movie, but I think it's my favorite to watch like multiple times over and over again. It's like got some fucked up parts like Seven, but then it's just got some really well done parts like Social Network and Zodiac. I think Social Network and Zodiac are probably his top two. But I think this movie's just really well done. I think it's paced well, even at 2 hours and 40 minutes. I think it's the music really builds the tension and just keeps it interesting. And I think it's just a very well done mystery. So I saw the original foreign Girl with the Dragon Tattoo in theaters. And I then saw this one, I think Christmas Day in theaters or shortly after. I can't remember. But
Well, I saw this in theaters twice. So
that's
beat
good.
that.
Well, that's good. I saw both of them once, so 1 + 1 = 2 as well.
The reason that I wanted to see this movie twice in theaters was just because of the opening credits scene of the way like the CGI congeal black slime and stuff. I thought that was really cool. And I think Led Zeppelin barely lets people use that song in the Immigrant Song in any film or the only other place I've ever heard this song in a movie is Thor. That's it.
So there's actually a pretty interesting. Yesterday I read. Do you guys know who Young Gravy is?
Yeah.
So Young Gravy
No,
is being.
I don't, but Taylor does.
So Young Gravy is being sued by Rick Astley, from the famous song, the Rickroll song,
Never Gonna Give You Up. Yeah.
So he has this song called "Get Betty, Get Money" or something that is basically, I thought was a sample of "Never Gonna Give You Up," but basically what he did is he was able to use the beat to make his own song, but he then didn't get the licensing to use Rick Astley's sample, so he paid a guy to sound as much like Rick Astley as he could. So now Rick Astley is suing him, basically saying you couldn't get a sample, so you got this other form of copyright to be able to recreate the song, and I didn't have any control over that, so I'm suing you because you basically tried to get around the sample. And I feel like that has to be what happened here, right? They recreated Immigrant Song with a female singer, and it's Atticus Ross and I can't remember the other guy from Nine Inch Nails. No, Ross and Atticus Finch. They're recreating the song, and it's just it's funny that they had that suit at this exact same time as well. I'm rewatching this movie, the way that music and copyright works, and the different variations, how Taylor Swift can re-record her songs, but someone can only own masters, but they don't own the songs. All of that shit is so confusing to me. But yeah, we have the Immigrant Song in this, sung by someone else.
Yeah, and that's what made me go to the theater twice for it. Also, I think you're right. This is a really well-paced movie. This is a really well-done mystery. It's not my favorite. Like, it's not one that I could go see over and over again. I think Seven would probably be the one I could go see over and over again, and Zodiac is definitely on repeat for me. But let's see, Taylor, overall, what did you think of The Girl with Dragon Tattoo?
I don't want to say I enjoyed it because it's not like an enjoyable movie to watch. I appreciated it.
You found entertainment in it.
Yeah, I really liked the mystery part of it, and the way that they did the unfolding of the mystery I thought was really different and clever. I wouldn't say that I would ever want to watch it again. It was really hard to watch. Really hard to watch.
It's a really dark film. It has like very little to no levity in it.
There actually is some, a little bit. And it's funny is the person who is sort of violated the most in this movie is Lisbeth, played by Rooney Mara, and all the levity really comes from lines from her.
That's true.
And it's I think it's like a smart decision to do it that way, like to have that character be the one to like sort of the litmus test for what we're allowed to laugh at.
She's the character with the biggest chip on her shoulder, but she's also the only comedy relief we get through the whole film.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to talk about in the beginning too is, so for doing this movie, I decided to rewatch the foreign version, the Swedish version. And the reason I wanted to do that is because, so I remember when I first saw that version and then I saw that this one came out, I was kind of annoyed. I was like, I don't understand why we need to do this. Like, that version was so good. And then when I watched Fincher's version, I was like, I think that's a better done movie, but I think that the mystery is a little more well done in the foreign version, which I now like a little bit disagree with. I think what I was thinking of is, so there's two main mystery elements to this. One, it's the other murders, and then two, it's like the photo component of like trying to figure out what Harriet's looking at, you know, who that person is. And so the way they handled the other like biblical murders in the foreign version, they just extended it a lot. They like included both of them in on it. And so it's like, but after watching both of them this week, I think this is like the better version. And that's like, the other one is still really great. But I mean, this one has Daniel Craig, Rooney Mara, and then you have Skarsgård as like one of my favorite like pure evil characters in like a movie. Just like, especially that last scene where he has Daniel Craig tied up. So I think we can get into it unless you have any more overall thoughts.
No, I was just going to say that the overall like pacing of the movie we said was really good, but I did feel like it took a while. Watching it this time for me, I remember them teaming up sooner in the film, and I just realized how long it takes for those two characters to meet. I find it funny that even before they meet, though, like in the movie, that she knows everything there is to know about him anyway. So it's almost like because of that, there's a lot of history between these characters that have already been, like, it's already been done. The work is already there. So when they do meet, it's like this instant connection, which I think you need that because it's, you know, this movie has a time limit.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing this movie does too is it's like, it's either a little bit more subtle than the other version, or it's like taking into account people have watched that version or people have read the book, to where like some of the way they depict things, like one of the things is Lisbeth is like a photographic like memory genius. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
she's a complete like, you know, she's just
in
a
this,
genius.
In this version, in the American version.
No, in both versions. They spell it out. In the other version, they spell it out much more specifically, and are like, I think at one point even say like, oh, so you're a genius. But in this version, it's like things like, when she's going over to that guy's house the night for the one really bad scene, he's like, "Oh, do you have a pen and paper?" She's like, "I don't need pen and paper. Tell me the address." Or like when he hands her the Bible verses, she's like, "I don't need it. I have it." I mean, just like things like that to just like show you, like, oh, she's just the way her brain works. So
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's either the movie is like you've read the book, you kind of know the story, so I'm going to depict it this way, or it's just like it's a little bit more subtle and it like rewards rewatching it. So, the movie starts out with this call from Christopher Plummer. I even forgot to mention fucking Christopher Plummer in this. Like that's another just like amazing actor to have like lead this movie, have like this like lead part. But
not a very big role too, and all things considering. Also, the second Christopher Plummer movie we've done that involves Nazis.
Well, and Christopher Plummer, the second, we've also done the other 2011 movie from this, Beginners, and in that, the Elizabeth's boss from the agency is his I think his gay lover, or one of his lovers in the movie in Beginners.
In Beginners, okay,
yeah, which it seems like 3 years ago we did that movie now. But yeah, he calls the cop to discuss. He's like, "Oh, I got another one of these flowers." And he's like, they keep coming, and then we get your opening credits that you went to go see twice.
They're so good. And I think like back then you didn't really see much of that kind of motion work to that extent.
I don't know how you've seen the opening to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man's. I don't know. It seems
oh, going through the webs.
Yeah.
You're saying a little plagiarism?
I'm just saying the early 2000s vibe was there.
Well, it's a shame too, because watching this on DVD, and that's how Taylor watched it for the first time, but it's so much more visually stimulating in theaters. Just having that like on the big screen, 15 feet high is just like, I don't know. Watching it now on the DVD version, I was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't mind seeing this again in theaters. Not maybe for that part of it, because the other thing too is like the cinematography of the movie is fairly like, you have this like frozen North Pole like Sweden that you're in a lot, but then like the flashbacks to 1966, I think like the way that's presented is pretty beautiful. Like the whole thing really kind of puts you in the place you're at. So this movie, I think, spends like the first like 10 to 15 minutes just setting it up, right? So Mikkel Blomkvist, who's played by Daniel Craig, loses a libel suit against this Winterstrom guy. It's going to wipe out his life savings. In the foreign version, he actually is going to go to jail. So I guess libel is a criminal matter in Sweden, which is interesting. Okay. And then he tells, we find out that he's having an affair with Robin Wright, which is like, no, who among us wouldn't?
You know who's also in this scene is Joel Kinnaman, who is in like Suicide Squad and plays Rick Flag in that, and then he's also what's that show?
Killing.
The Killing. He's in the show The Killing. He has one line that you can barely hear. I think at like a word at the beginning and a line at the end. But yeah. I didn't know who he was when I last saw this. So knowing who he is and watching this again, I was like, oh shit, he's in it. And then he's not really in it at all.
So the reason he is in this is because that character plays a major role in 2 and 3. And the plan was for them to make the full trilogy. And so he signed up for that. And then he got this. It's one of my biggest like regrets that we don't get to see the next 2 films. Although I will say that like of the 3, this is the best book. Like the mystery, the rest of it sort of just goes into like Elizabeth and her backstory, but like this one has like the full mystery to it.
Yeah, because the other ones don't have the Daniel Craig character, right?
No, he's in all of them.
Oh, he is? Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, she becomes more central to it. The rest of it, from what I remember, I mean, at this point, it's been like forever. So, and then we meet Lisbeth, and it does get right into, we meet her when Froda comes to like he wants to get more information on Daniel Craig's character. And I do love some of the lines, like what is what is not in this report that you should have told me, maybe some personal thing. And he's like, well, he's having an affair. Sometimes he performs cunnilingus. Not enough, in my opinion. He's like, you were right to not put that in the report. She's like, I know.
I think a huge part of this movie is the underestimating her, and everyone does it. And she is like the main hero. Like if you think about what Mikhail does, Daniel Craig's character does, he's just like he's super like aware, and he notices things, sure. He eventually solves the mystery, but he solves it at the same time that she solves it. And on top of that, she's the one kicking all the ass. In the end, she saves him. So it's like this underestimating of her character showing in this scene is just like kind of a theme throughout the whole film.
Yeah. And, we get after this too, she continues to spy on Daniel Craig, and she continues to look up Wennerstrom because she gives this line where she's like, yeah, he made a fool of himself if you think it went down that way. Basically, like, he was kind of set up, which is not, once again, it's kind of like subtly put in there until it's explained at the very end when she's like, oh, I did some more digging if you want to look at it.
Right.
And then we next get to him meeting Wenger. There's a call at Christmas, and, he decides to go up there. And I love this explanation in this first flashback where he's like, you're going to be investigating the most detestable group of people, my family. And I sent you last night, I sent you a family tree. Family tree. Because I was like, I'm even confused as to like who's what, because basically like Anita and Harriet are friends in the same age, but Anita's her aunt.
Yeah,
it was so confusing to me.
This is not her cousin. Yep.
Yeah.
So.
While we were watching it, you kept saying that Skarsgård was his son. I'm like, no, it's his nephew. And we argued the whole movie because I was like, oh, like I think it was this person. I think it was this person. And Alain was like, no, it's definitely not. It's definitely this person. I think we were talking about the same exact person, but we couldn't figure out what their title was in the family.
Right. So. Well, because we learned that Harriet's grandfather was a Nazi, and then it's not explained, but her father Gottfried, I think, was also a Nazi, and then Harold, who is also, Harriet's grandfather is Henrik's brother. Harold is also Henrik's brother. They were all Nazis. And it's also, there's this like undercurrent of like Harold at one point in the movie when we finally get to meet him is like, I don't hide the past like the rest of Sweden does. And I was like, did Sweden have like a huge Nazi problem? Like I didn't, that I didn't know about? Or is it just like, I don't know, this small group that Harold was in and he's like, now we were all Nazis.
Maybe they did. I mean, it would make more sense for him to be like, oh, I don't hide it like the rest of my family does, right? Because we find out later that they pretty much sweep all that under the rug, except for Harold, who just kind of, he has a very messy house, but I'm sure if you like, he's not really hiding any of his medals or anything. It's probably all there.
Right. So then we get to the flashback, and one thing I noticed for the first time in this is we actually see Martin in the flashback on the bridge helping the guy get out of the car, and then he has his jacket and he flips it to put it back on, and the shot cuts right before you see the crest. So the movie's kind of telling you like he was there, but it doesn't want to give away too much.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
that flashback is kind of weird because we kind of get it before we meet the rest of the family. So it's like we see the young versions of everyone, but we have no idea who they all are. We know who Harriet is, and we know who Christopher Plummer is because we get it from his like POV of him telling the story. So when he says, "Oh, Harriet was obviously trying to tell me something, but I wouldn't listen," we know that he's the guy who wouldn't listen, and Harriet's the young girl who looked like she was trying to tell him something. But everyone else was just kind of like, you piece everyone who everyone is later on, because you get each piece of the puzzle later on.
Yeah, and I will say the foreign version does a better job of like explaining who everyone is and kind of setting it up. Where this one is just like you kind of figure it out as you go along, and so like I don't know, it's in order to like follow it, it might be better to set it up like in a more like laying out the plot sort of way. Like this is exposition, so you can follow it, but it's like less
Right.
real to life of like how it would be explained to him and how he would figure it out along the way. So really, you just needed one shot of that family tree for like 10 seconds so we could all look at it.
We need to keep coming back to it too, because every piece of information, and Daniel Craig's character has this little thing that he's doing in his shack, but we as the audience never really get to see it in like full detail, so we don't know, unless we keep track of it. So yeah, that was just really confusing to me, and obviously I was wrong, but Taylor had a way to keep track of it. What was
I paid attention.
Oh, okay, wow.
I think it was really brief, and he went through it so fast at the beginning. First of all, I want to say that whole scene where he's describing his family, I could not stop laughing. I thought it was hilarious the way that he talked shit about each person in his family. I thought was so funny.
Oh, you're talking about where he's like, and she doesn't talk to him, and he doesn't talk to her, and he's a Nazi. Like
yeah,
that.
and he's like, "Oh, what about her?" And he's like, "Asshole." It's like everything that he said was really funny. But that quick little run through, I don't know. I just there were some people that I was unsure, but they ended up not really mattering. And the people that mattered, I was able to remember who was who somehow.
There was Berger and Isabella, who like we meet for 1 minute at the hospital, but otherwise are like not in the movie, but they get mentioned.
Yeah. And then I think really the important part is to understand that there's a company that's owned by Harriet and Martin's father. And then when he died, Martin got the company. And I think I was just confused on thinking that maybe it was run by the brothers and then Martin was Christopher Plummer's son. But I understand now how that doesn't make sense.
I think Henrik ran it, right? Which is funny because if you look at that family chart,
Who the fuck is Henrik?
No, it was his son who runs the company. It wasn't his brother's son. It wasn't Martin. You're still confused.
No, okay. So Henrik is Christopher Plummer. He's running the company, but also Gottfried works for the company too. And then now, at the current day, which is 2002, Martin runs the company because Henrik is too old.
I was right.
Henrik doesn't have any children.
Henrik doesn't have any children.
But Martin is Godfrey's child.
Yes.
So he basically gave the company to his nephew when he got too old.
Okay, so I understand why it was confusing. Because at the beginning he said that when his brother died, he took care
Of Martin and Harriet.
Of Martin and Harriet. So they were like his kids, but they weren't.
His kids.
Yeah. And the other thing that you talked about that line where he was talking shit about all his family. He's like, oh, they live there. And then Daniel Craig has this line. He's like, and you live right there. And he's like, oh, yes. The person who hires the detective has to be on the list. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's a line from Knives Out, which starred Daniel Craig and Christopher Plummer. And I just think that's like so funny because I think he says that like, oh, we have to figure out who hired me because that's like usually the prime suspect of who did something, who's the bad guy. So I just love that part. The other thing is like the flashback a little bit felt like the setup of like an unsolved mystery show, right? Because they're like, yeah, so the bridge was closed, so she couldn't have escaped that way. They would have seen her, and she couldn't. If she had drowned in the water, her body would have come back. There were no boats missing, so she has to be dead. And then at the end, you're just like, oh, damn it, someone took her across the bridge.
It was the Nazi with the pipe in the foyer killing Harriet. The thing that I was also confused about, and I think this is definitely one of his most like intricate plot movies. A confusing plot and his most like sexually charged films put into one in this one. But the thing that I was confused about is that it was Harriet that kept delivering the flowers to Christopher Plummer, right?
Correct.
Kind of a dick move on her part, if you look at it that way.
No. And I had even said that. I knew she was alive. And I was like, she's the one sending it because she loved him.
In the foreign version, she says, "I kept sending them to you so that you would know I was out there somewhere."
Yeah, I thought that was...
But in the beginning, it's introduced really fucking creepy because Christopher Plummer is like, well, Daniel Craig is like, who else knows about these flowers? And he's like, me, Harriet, and her killer. And then it just comes to this thing where it's like, I don't know, it just came off as real creepy in the beginning.
Well, yeah, that's the point. But it's funny. He's like, me, Harriet, and her killer. And then you're like, oh, so the only reason you think the killer knows is because you think she was killed and they're still being sent. But no one else in the family knew, which is also weird. She's buying you this gift of these framed flowers and you're not letting anyone else in the family know about them. They're just your little thing you hide up in an attic.
Maybe he didn't want to alarm anyone. Also, he doesn't speak to half of them, apparently.
That's true. Not anymore.
Also, I guess, I mean, her body was never found. So it's just like, how could you?
Well, and all of her personal belongings were left.
Well, that's a big hint of towards why she would be murdered. But the fact that they never recovered a body is a big thing too.
It was weird that every single person in the family was like, she's definitely dead. Definitely dead. She died. No question about it. Like, not a single one of them was like, they never found a body. I don't know. Like, every single one of them was like, dead. Like, how do you know that for sure?
Well, the detective says, like, there's no way we could have searched the entire island for a body. He's like, they could have buried it anywhere. He's like, but we do know she didn't escape. And they also, the fact that Gottfried was drowned 1 year earlier and his body turned up. I think it was just like, it's probably a thing they discussed at a lot of dinners and everyone had come to the conclusion she was dead. So they're just like, you've been saying it for close to 40 years.
But not a single person, when approached by like someone who was actively investigating it, was like, yeah, like none of them expressed any kind of question. It was very matter of fact.
Especially her. But no, I mean, yeah, well, especially Martin, right? Like he had all the reason to. He must have known. No, because at the end he was even confused about. He thought she was dead too. I don't know.
No, he thought she was missing. He knew she was missing. Because he said, you found her. Because Martin has to know, I'm the only one who would have killed her.
Right. And I didn't do it.
Yeah, so Martin knows, but he's also playing along. He's actually like, in the other version, like the way he's played, and it's like the writing, not the acting, but it's like, he's more of hidden as a character, where in this one, Martin is front and center, and it's like you're being diverted from thinking he's a suspect. And even like our main character doesn't think he's a suspect just by the way he acts. And I think that's like a really well done thing. The last thing is we get the phone numbers and the girls' names at the end of the diary, and the detective's like, oh, I've called all these people. And it is sort of like, once you know what those are, it's sort of coincidental that like two of the names did coincide with like those phone numbers they happened to call, but those aren't phone numbers at all. That was just like super coincidental that like one of them was a Magda and the other was a Rebecca.
Yeah, I thought that too.
So
but I guess that would have to play out for the reveal at the end. And then it was his daughter. I like how it was set up that he's just not a religious guy at all, but then his daughter is. So, although I am confused how, what is that, 5 numbers point to Leviticus? I don't know how the Bible works.
The 3 is the third book of the Bible, Leviticus. They all start with 3. And then the next 4 numbers are the first 2 are chapter and the second 2 are verse.
And our verses. Okay, fine. So I was just confused on the 3 pointing to Leviticus. I was surprised that isn't it a little bit far-fetched that his daughter would just look at that and be like, Leviticus?
Well, except she's in her Bible because of how messed up her life is, right? She's, her friends say she goes from like being in her Bible to, flirting with boys to having secrets to da 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 da. So she's just like, and when Anita, in quotation marks, is explaining what Harriet was like, and she describes it, which is really funny watching it again, knowing that she's actually Harriet and talks about herself. She's like, yeah, she was always in her Bible, the only Christian in that family. Can you believe it? And so you like, obviously she's turned away from that faith now. They also do say that Gottfried was religious in the way that like people at Westboro Baptist Church are religious. You know what I mean? Like that they quote the Bible, but he's also using it to like kill Jewish women.
He's also a Nazi? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know about them. But so let's get to Lisbeth again. We meet her new guardian. It's creepy as fuck from the beginning. And he's like, the good times are over. I can't trust you. And, it's funny is I think the way that her backstory is displayed is a lot more subtle than the other movie. He's like, oh, you did this and this and this. You just recently cracked a bottle over some guy's head, so I'm going to take over your finances again. And her scream in the elevator after she leaves, I think is very like, it's like bone chilling, like how you can hear like the craziness of it and like the anger, like the guttural anger.
It's kind of funny to see her in like that situation because she's such a calm, critical thinker in everything she does. Like when she's hacking the computers and when she's trying to infiltrate the buildings and stuff like that. But then she has these moments where she's completely unhinged. Like her emotions get the best of her, but it's still I kind of compare her to like Sherlock Holmes, where she's like as smart as that, right? She's a crime solver person, but she's also very emotional. But it doesn't get in the way of her doing her damn job. What do you think about the character, Taylor?
About the character?
Lisbeth.
In general?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so many things. So I think a big part of it that you were saying earlier was that she's just constantly undermined and people underestimate her. And I think that's part of the reason she's so good at her job. There was part of the movie that I was like, she stands out so much. Like she has a weird haircut. She's got no eyebrows. She's got piercings. Like how do people not see her with a camera, like taking their video and like doing all this sleuthing work? And how does she get away with that without people? She sticks out. Like how do people not see her and be like weird? And it's because that very reason that people are constantly underestimating her, and it allows her to get these pieces of information that she wouldn't have been able to get if people thought that she was this, fantastic investigator.
Well, she doesn't look like a PI. She looks like a punk. So yeah.
These scenes go back and forth a little bit. So I guess we'll just do them a little bit in order. But the dinner at Martin's is, I think, like kind of a crazy scene to like think about and watch after knowing how it ends. He even talks about at the end of the movie, he's like, while we were eating that moose the other night at dinner, I had Irina down here. He's like, so they're all having this dinner as he has like another girl that he's killing in a cage downstairs. It's just like kind of like chilling. But that scene, he talks about, he has this woman who like won't leave her husband, but they like have an affair. And, he also talks about too, he's like, she thinks I'm so conventional. You know what I mean?
Right.
I just keep going back to the end because that scene is so good. Skarsgård is so good in that scene. But Martin also, to throw Daniel Craig off his tracks, is like, you have to investigate Harriet. It's got to be such a big part of the book because it changed everything. And I think that's for two reasons: to throw him off his track, but also because he's hoping this guy can find Harriet because it's like the one that got away.
It's funny every time he goes around and he's like trying to interview these family members for this book, and they're all already suspicious of him. They're like, you're just here to look at the Harriet thing, right? And he's like, no, I'm not. I'm doing this thing. I'm just doing the book. And then they're each one of them is like, well, shit, dude, you really should be looking to the Harriet thing, because that's a huge part of this family's deal. And he's like, well, now that you mention it, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Like, it's kind of the perfect plan in such a way that everyone of the family still wants to talk about it. So he has this perfect story. He's like the perfect alibi.
So one thing that changed from the other movie, which I think is a little bit interesting, is so one, Mikhail Blomkvist apparently his father worked for Wenger, and so he used to get babysat by Harriet and Anita when he was a little kid.
That's weird. I
So
like that he has no connection to this family, though.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary, right? In the other movie, it adds this, like, I guess it adds a want from him to solve this and a reason he would take the case. But the other thing is Cecilia hits on him in the other version of this, and she's the one at dinner with Martin. But in this movie, Cecilia's just like a bitch to him and is like, no one wants you here, and like no one trusts you, and you're a libelous. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just funny, that change.
So the reason that he's doing this in this film is because Christopher Plummer says that he has all this info that's basically like this get out of lawsuit.
It's a smoking gun against Vennerstrom.
And that's why he takes the case. So you're saying that they don't have that in the original. It's just his connection to the two girls?
Right. Well, and the other change too is the daughter is like in the other movie, but like she doesn't speak. And in this one, they establish her as a Christian, and she like figures out the Bible verses for him. In the other one, you have Lisbeth is like kind of tracking him this whole time because she's interested in him, which I think this one has that too, because you have to explain like one of the reasons she would have sex with him so quickly after meeting him in person. And it's like this attraction she's built up over investigating him and following him. She's like, he's a really good person who's been wronged. And she's like, I'm a good person that's been wronged, even though she like almost burned her father to death. And you don't know why in this movie. You find out later it was for a good cause. But in the foreign version, Elizabeth is tracking his computer, sees the numbers, figures out their Bible verses, and then sends him an email saying, hey, you should look into this. And then Mikhail's like, what the fuck is that? And then he like finds Elizabeth, and then, they go on a quest together to figure out the Bible verses, which in this one, like she does it on her own. She does all the work, which I think is an interesting way to do it. And it's also, once again, it's just establishing like her as this badass and kind of putting her at the forefront, which I like. Next, we'll get into the part that's like probably the darkest of this movie. We can just go through it kind of quickly. But so she gets attacked on a train, beats the shit out of this dude, but her laptop gets broken and she needs money. So she goes to her new guardian, who forces her to give him a BJ. And the only thing I'll say about this, and I think it's the purpose of this is to make it uncomfortable, but it's like the way it's filmed, like from above and showing his enjoyment of it. And like, it is to make you feel so fucking uncomfortable.
It does a really good job of that. I think too, like up till now, we've seen Lisbeth in like a situation or situations where we as the audience are figuring out her character, but she's always been kind of one step ahead of everyone. Like she's already this like, I think in the scenes that establishing that is like she's this PI that's gathered all this information on Mikhail, but in being questioned about, is this like all the information that you include? And she kind of shuts that dude down, like, yeah, unless you want to know how much he eats someone out, but shut the fuck up, right? So she's always had this handle on it. So this is like the time where it's like she doesn't have control of this situation. This situation is beyond her.
And she's like, this happens and she's like, okay, well, he's going to make me do this again. So she gets a camera. One thing about the other version, the new Guardian is very black and white. He's like a very evil dude. And after he forces the BJ, he gives her like, she's like, I need 20,000 for a new computer. And he gives her 7,000. He's like, I know how much computers cost. And in this one, he like just gives her the check almost sheepishly, right?
Yeah.
So then we get to,
I get not to be confused with shameful, because he's definitely not shameful about everything he's doing, but it's almost like a performance anxiety thing from him.
I do think it's I don't know. I think he is like, I don't think it's trying to show him like positively, but it does almost seem like he's like shows regret at certain points. And it's like, I don't think the movie's trying to make you feel bad for him.
I took it a completely opposite way. So I felt like if he had been just straight up evil. So when we think of that kind of person in society, we think of someone who's straight up evil. But in the real world, that's not how people are. They're, multifaceted. And to have this man do these horrible things to her and then just being like, okay, here's your check, blah, blah, and like kind of acting like everything was fine, almost made it more disturbing. Like he didn't see that what he was doing, she did not want to happen. Like what he was doing was disgusting. But the way that he was acting afterwards, and even during those scenes, it was like he didn't see anything wrong with what he was doing. It's like he
had no regret.
Right. It's not like, oh, I'm bad, I'm doing this to you, I hope it hurts, and bleh. Like that's how we picture people like that, but that's not always how it is. And to have this dude be like, hope you like this, and then like act like everything's fine after he's done something so heinous. Yeah. I felt more disturbed by it.
Yeah, I can definitely see it that way. I mean, because after the really horrible scene that we're about to talk about, he's like, "Oh, can I drive you home? Are you sure?" And then later on, when she comes back, he's like, I feel bad about about the way we left things. And you're like, well, was that about to turn into another horrible scene? Is it just part of his act, right? You know what I mean? But I agree with you. Part of the point of this is when you're showing this character, just showing a straight evil person isn't real. You know what I mean? It like when you have like Harold, who's a Nazi, right? He's like kind of making jokes, and he's just like this like old dude with like a weird voice, right? Like he's an evil person, but he's also just has this character about him that might make you laugh. You know what I mean? So it's just like, yeah, these are real people, and it's almost more disturbing that way. It's not like trying to lighten what these people are, make you feel sympathy for them. It's like these are all of these evil people are humans, and that's worse.
Yeah, it's almost like because he can go back to just acting like everything is fine and normal is like, well, then how many people in your life is, secretly like this, but then they act all fine and normal in like everyday society. So yeah, when you think of it that way, it's way worse. But then we get to the scene. What's interesting about the scene is where it's placed in the movie. It's right before our two main characters meet up. What would you say the purpose of this scene is to like show? I guess what I'm saying is, could this scene be cut out and then we have the same movie, or what do you feel like this scene adds to the film?
Well, it sets up the revenge. I mean, I think part of it's to be shocking. It's obviously in the book. I think it's a little bit, it is, like you said, she's always kind of prepared. And she even says later on in the revenge scene that, I thought you were just going to make me give you another BJ. I didn't realize how fucking sick you were. But I think in this version, what it sets up a little bit is the bounce back from her and how kind of scarred she is, how kind of crazy she is. Because when she is getting revenge on him, she's making jokes the whole time. She like goes into his pants to grab something and she's like, oh, gabardine, which is like what he fucking says when he makes her give him the blowjob. But first she's like, oh, feel these pants, they're gabardine or whatever. You know what I mean? And she's like making a joke as she's just like kicked a dildo up his ass. So I think
Right.
the way she acts afterwards and the revenge, I think that it's almost needed to be set up this way. When I rewatched the foreign version, I was like, I kind of remember that one being worse, but this one is done worse. First of all, like the shot as you're pulling away from the door, it's hard to talk about something is really well done, but like she tries to run away and she reaches for the door and slams it. And then the camera is pulling back as it's looking at the end of the side of the door and you just hear the struggle in there, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that's a really well done shot. You then see this guy, and one thing I noticed this time is he's like breathing very heavily. And once again, it's showing this like he's not this evil robot. He's this human being, and this might be like the first time he's raped somebody, right? Like
he's like this like out of shape dude.
No, but I think the heavy breathing is like it's not like because he's fucking struggling it's like he's like, oh, am I doing this? Oh my god, okay, like I'm doing this. And then when he's like,
oh, you think it's nerves? You think it's nerves?
I thought it was a little bit.
Did you take it that way?
I took it as like an excitement thing. Like he was
really
excited.
That could be it too. That could be it too. Yeah. And just the line of like, you know, how do you feel about anal sex is like I think really like nails how like in the other version that's not said and you just see her walking funny afterwards, and then this version they have that too, but it's like wants to drive home how depraved this guy is. Now, one thing I'll say about I read this about the real actor that like, well, I read two things about the scene that I wanted to talk about. Is one, the next day when they're filming the shower scene, they're getting her ready for it, and hair and makeup comes in. They're like, oh, someone already did your bruising. But apparently filming the scene was so rough that she had bruising from doing it. And the second thing is the guy who plays her guardian apparently was so like disturbed by filming the scene that like the next day he just said he was like in his room crying the whole day because of how like fucked up it was. And so it's just, I don't know. Yeah. It's like, it doesn't get any easier when you watch that part of the film. It's honestly probably something you can just like skip if you want to rewatch the rest of it. That's maybe what I would suggest.
I'll say that I did not watch that scene at all. I saw where it was going and I closed my eyes and I did not watch any of that scene.
But, you know, though, I will say, being someone who's watched this in theaters twice, is that because of how bad that scene is, it is so good to watch the revenge scene as like, especially like the tattoo part, I think is something like that doesn't go away from you. And one thing that I really liked about establishing who this rapist character is that he has a picture of his family on his desk. He has a wife and a kid and kids. And the fact that he has to now hide his body from his family and they're not supposed to like pick up that that's suspicious at all or anything.
I don't think he has a wife and kids.
Yeah, on his desk he has a photograph of a woman and two children, which establishes that he has a family.
I mean, she's like, you're not allowed to bring any women back here. They never mention like, oh, you know, your wife. I
missed that.
So I don't know. I mean, either way, it doesn't
make it up.
Either way, it doesn't really matter. I think that seems
maybe
still
it's
hard.
his sister. Maybe it's his sister and his two nephews or something. Could be that. I don't know. But there's a picture with a family that kind of establishes that he has some sort of family, but now he has that I'm a rapist pig tattooed all over his body. It's like no summer pool days for him.
Yeah, his family's like, hey, you want to go? He's like, no, I'm actually gonna take a pass on that one. Yeah, so we can talk about the revenge scene. There's a couple of things before that too, but I I still like. I know you're like, oh, it's a revenge scene. We're happy it happens. It's still hard to watch. Like one, so in the other version, she pulls his dildo out of a drawer and uses his own dildo on him. And in this one, she pulls this huge fucking metal monstrosity and just shoves it up there. And then when she's getting attention later and kicks it twice, and the second kick, you hear stuff like ripping. Like the sound it makes is awful. So
Yeah.
it's hard to watch. But even with that, she like, I told her about the one line where she's like, ooh, like, Gabardine. And then she says, once you can sit again, which could be a while, I admit, I'm going to have you, I need to write this report, just like the funny line of like, yeah, I just destroyed your insides. You know what I mean? I think it's you talked about how there's not a lot of levity, but like her bringing it in this. And then the other thing too, is she's like, I want you to write your report and say how sociable I'm being. And she does like the air quotes and like finger quotes, like,
Right.
And then she gets in his face and she's like, you've read the reports that say I'm crazy. And he shakes his head no. And she's like, no, you can agree because I am crazy. And the way the camera shows her face with like the eye black makeup, like she looks crazy. It's like really well done.
Yeah. And I think that also drives a better reasoning later on why she can get money easily from him now. Like, especially when she's like, I didn't like your report. Like, and this goes back to what you were saying, Taylor, about how well she can just come off of so unimposing, is that she just puts on a hood and it's like, he's 2 feet away from her and he has no idea that it's her. But then when she stops the elevator and she reveals himself to him, he's terrified. He's now become the prey. He's become the victim. He's like completely terrified of her. And so then when she's like, I didn't like your report, I need you to do a better one next time. He's like, yeah, okay, whatever you want,
And quit looking at tattoo removal sites.
But so now, because all these scenes are switching back and forth between what she's doing and Daniel Craig's just kind of getting deeper and deeper into the investigation. I love all the boxes being sent to his little shack on the island.
Well, it's so cold, he starts burning his own books.
Yeah.
And then there's a cat.
A great scene is when Robin visits him and she's like, is it warmer inside? And he's like, no.
Yeah, and she comes up and they actually offer to buy half of the newspaper or a controlling interest, which we find out. And I love the line from Henrik when they're being interviewed, and he's like, I don't like bullies, and I don't like someone who sues someone into submission. So if Wennerstrom wants to try it again, he's going to find someone with a lot of fucking money who's like not going to back down so easily.
But it's mostly Martin's idea to do it. And I think Daniel Craig is really smart. And he's like, I don't like that, because he's like, one of these dudes definitely murdered Harriet, and it could be Martin. I just don't want to be in the pocket of these guys.
I think it's Henrik's idea, because Henrik is the good guy, and Martin even says, he's like, oh, we're not doing it to make money. I think Martin's going along to just not seem like the bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, but he's going along with it, like, but not to not just seem like the bad guy, but it's like, okay, so you do find out, like, worst case scenario, you do find out that I'm a murderer or whatever. Well, then we have controlling interest in the company you work for. Like, it's kind of a setting up for maybe a blackmail thing. That's the way I saw it.
Yeah. The other thing that's going along at this time is he's finding the parade photos. And I got to say, like, I know that Taylor is someone who takes a lot of photos. I just found it like somewhat lucky that he's able to find these photos at the newspaper that basically turn into a little mini video of her like turning and looking and seeing the shock on her face and then running away.
And to be framed in the same shot as a clock is really helpful too.
It's like in the crime shows where they're like, "Oh, can you zoom in on that and enhance? It's like that's not how pixels work, but thank
Can you bring up the resolution on this?
Yeah. Yeah, and especially like they would have been using film cameras and like not just like, you spin to the next slide film cameras, but like you have to like put in each frame most likely or very slowly reel it. Like it would not be like boom 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 of her, like
Well, it wasn't that long. It was the 60s, wasn't it, David?
1966.
Yeah, it was the 60s. It wasn't the 30s.
No, but it was still like you're looking at a very slow roll of film. It's not like, film now where you can just zip.
The other thing too is that it seemed like everyone at that parade had a camera. And it's not like it was today where it was, they're less likely to. But so who was taking those photos off the balcony? Was it someone they knew? Oh no, it was that woman on their honeymoon, right? Oh, no, the woman on their honeymoon was taking the photos of the opposite, the way she was looking.
Yeah, I'm glad you could figure that out. So yeah, the newspaper person was taking the photos of Harriet, not intentionally, right? But taking the photos that way. And then one of the frames of the photos, you see a flash from the other woman. And I think Lisbeth is the one who's like, oh, her photos would help like later on.
Right.
The other thing at this time, the daughter stops by and she's like, go easy on the Catholics. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, the Bible verses. And then he like immediately like figures it out and he calls the other detective about Rebecca. I feel like I'm a person who's like, yeah, but the book was better. But one of the things about the foreign movie is they made like figuring out the other women killed like such more of a mystery. So like the one who's Rebecca Jacobson, like in the thing, it's actually BJ. And so they have trouble finding that one. But then it's because they're like, oh, it's actually Rebecca Jacobson, but she went by Becca. That's
Becca.
Why it's BJ. And so that part made like the movie focus so much more on that mystery aspect of it. And I was like, oh, I kind of like that. But then when you think about it, the fact that it's a serial killer, if they never figured that part out, they probably still would have figured out that Martin was the killer because of the photo.
But those killings were by Godfrey. They weren't by Martin.
The last one was Martin because Godfrey was like already dead.
Right, no, but that's what I'm saying though. Remember, because okay, so Harriet obviously, how was it ever explained how Harriet even got on the track of this guy, of her own uncle?
Gottfried,
her father?
Yeah, her father. Gottfried said at one point Gottfried was like almost killing her and was like bragging about this. But I think that's like the night she killed him. But I think Gottfried probably mentioned it when he was drunk, is what we're supposed to believe.
So she knew it was her dad. She was just putting the evidence together?
Yeah, and then maybe she was starting to figure out it was Martin. I guess that part's probably explained in the book, but not explained well here why she was looking into that. But she definitely was, maybe she was looking into it after her father did it, and she's like, oh, well, one of these murders, this murder is still happening. This one happened after, so it had to be Martin.
So, but that wasn't one of the Bible verses, right?
No, it was. I think like the last one.
Okay, so then I misunderstood something, because Martin says at the end, he says that I didn't just lie them all around like my father did. I'm not that sloppy. But all the Bible ones were laid out.
Yeah, so he did.
Everyone.
Yeah, the first one he did, he just left it out. Yeah.
But that's why I'm thinking that. Okay, well, I thought that Godfrey did all the Bible ones, and then he did the ones after those that the bodies were never recovered.
Well, no, at the very end, she like when Lisbeth is at the factory at the record center, she's like, Godfried, and then she's looking at Godfried's death date and looking at this last murder, and she's like, well, he couldn't have done it. So she like writes a bunch of question marks, and then she goes to get coffee, and then she comes back and she's like, hello, Martin. and then she like takes off.
Oh shit. Yeah, you're right. So she figures that out. And then so we don't know how many girls Martin has killed after his first one, the last Bible verse one.
Probably a fucking lot. It seems like it was a thing he liked to do.
Yeah. He had a whole secret setup.
He had a whole.
Someone doesn't just do that for one or two people.
How do you even get? How do you get that built? Especially with like the like the gas that comes in to knock people out.
Imagine being a contractor and walking into this guy's house, and he's like, "Oh yeah, just I want this hook right here, not for any particular reason."
Do you think any gas could come out of this, or does it have to be like what kind of gases could we use?
It's just kind of like the joke was like, how does Bruce Wayne get the Batcave built, right?
Well, it also reminds me. Did you guys watch Sherlock?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the one season where the guy like builds that hospital, and he's like, "Oh, I had to hire different contractors to build each section, so they couldn't figure out how it went together. So I can like basically so he could kill people." So it's like he's like. Martin's like, yeah, I just like I had one guy put this in and one guy put this in, and I did a little carpentry work too. I figured it out.
For something like that, you would just have to do the whole thing yourself. I think, like, maybe he was just really good with his hands.
Oh, you know what? No, he butchers animals. So that was like a metal area down there so he could have them build almost all of it, to cut up his animals that he kills. For food.
Okay, so the gas thing is maybe a self installation.
I don't know about that part, man. That's maybe.
Well, what if I bring an animal down here that I shot in the head and it just springs alive, and I need to pull a gas chamber?
Maybe.
But I mentioned that because then, okay, you're right. Lisbeth finds out that the last one. So did we ever figure out who the woman he had in the cage while they were eating, or was that just another victim? Like
just another. You're just supposed to be freaked out that he just had someone down there at the time. Yeah, you don't need to really know who it was.
Got it.
So getting back to it, Henrik collapses, and then Mikhail is like, tells Frodo that he has something, and he's like, but I need a research assistant, and he's like, oh, well, we'll get the lady who did the background check on you. And this is when we finally get the gang together. And he goes to Lisbeth, and I gotta say, there's a couple lines of dialogue that when I first heard it, you think are kind of cool, but then after you hear it more and more, you're like, it's a little clunky. So Lisbeth is like, "Who the hell are you?" And he's like, "I'm the guy you know better than my closest friends do." And I was like, that's just a weirdly formed sentence. But then the other line is, he's like, "I want you to help me catch a killer of women." And I was like, I don't think there's a better way to say that, but it is like, it's weirdly phrased for a guy who's a writer.
Well, it's also her that entices her, right? Like, she was just abused by a dude. So, and she had no interest in working with him. So when he's like dangling this thing in front of her, not only is this like a juicy mystery, but this is like to catch an abuser. I mean, it's like,
but he had no way of knowing that.
No, he had no way of knowing that, but maybe since he thought she would just be empathetic to the fact that she's a woman too, But like, the reason she took it, I felt like was the straw that brought it all together. She was like, okay, yeah, I have to do this.
The straw that brought it all together.
I stick by my metaphors.
It's not a metaphor. I think it's a turn of phrase. So I
stick by those two.
He gives her the Bible verses, and we get a montage of her going to all these places. The one cool one is where she's standing at like one of the murder sites, and then the Vanguard train goes behind her. Like the train, how earlier Henrik was like, we built the train tracks that, put this country together. So I thought that was like a pretty cool one. The one police captain's like, have you eaten? When's the last time you've eaten? She's like, I have a high metabolism. I can't keep weight on. He's like, I'm only saying that because you need to be on an empty stomach to see what you're about to see. While this is happening, he goes, Mikhail goes back and he like screams for the cat. And and then the cat's inside, and there's this quick line of like, "Oh, how'd you get in here?" And it's because Martin keeps snooping around, and someone keeps snooping around, presumably Martin at that point.
Oh, I thought Lisbeth let it in.
Yeah,
Now Elizabeth hadn't gotten there yet. And then the other thing is he like puts something on the fridge, and a bottle falls off, and he catches it. And that's just like a cool shot that they like, you know.
I'm sure that was an
they kept
accident.
in.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, that had to be an accident.
No, it was because Martin was in there messing with the bottle, and it was on a slightly different.
That's not where I left that.
So before Elizabeth gets there, there is this one quick scene where he goes to the hospital, and Harriet's mother's like, "We don't need a libelous to you know tell us about our family," and Martin's like, you know, "Oh no, he needs to stay. That's what Henrik wants." And then Martin goes to Mikhail and is like, "You should stay. This is what Henrik wants. Don't listen to them." And it's at one point, I think he tells him, "Oh, you know, you should leave." But then another point, later on, after he gets shot at, he tells him, "You should leave. You know, this is enough." But then he allows him to go investigate more. And so it's like he wants him to investigate, but he doesn't want to, you know what I mean? He's like trying to play both sides because he doesn't want to appear to like be telling him what to do, but like he doesn't want to be suspicious.
Don't be suspicious.
I knew someone was going to sing that.
We were, we had a scene where we were in the room, and I think it was just Martin and, what is the other guy's name?
Frada?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just them. It's just them two, and they're both like, "Yeah, he needs to be here. Yeah, this is what he would want. This is what he would want. He needs to be here." I was like, "It's one of these motherfuckers."
Well, Daniel Craig thinks it's him.
She thought Frada was related to them, but he's just the family lawyer, right?
Yeah, some version of that.
Yeah.
Some related thing. So Elizabeth shows up. She found the 5 cases that Harriet found, but then she found 5 more, and she's just going through them like in detail, showing these fucked up pictures. And Daniel Craig's like, "Okay, that's enough." And she's like, "I'm not finished." Like it doesn't matter to her, and he's just like, "This is gross. I don't want to look at this anymore." And then they have this quick line of like, "Okay, we're looking for a serial killer. What, you know, but what does that have to do with Harriet?" And Elizabeth's like, "She was looking for him too." And then they also figure out the Jewish connection. And Elizabeth is like, "Yeah, but Harriet isn't Jewish." And that's like your clue that's like, well, Harriet was being killed for a different reason, you know, because she found out.
And that's what ties her to the family and the photographs. Yeah.
There's this part right after this where the next morning she's like looking at his computer, and she's like looking through all his personal photos, including like the photos of him with other women, like with the other women. And then she quickly switches to his notes, and he's like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "I'm just looking through your notes." He's like, "Those are encrypted." She just looks at him. She's like, "Please."
Yeah. She starts looking, because we've kind of jumped around here because we've already talked about her going through and looking at the cases at the library, and then having to deal with that like bitchy librarian that's like, "I gotta go, so you gotta go too." And then she's like, "No, I can stay. You can go, but like you just call." Who was it? Was it Martin that she had to continuously call?
No, she's like, "Call Frodo if you don't believe me. You know, I'm allowed to get whatever I want."
But okay, but there was a plot point where Martin was like, Lisbeth has to tell security or leave the keys with security, and security would tell him when she's left, right?
Yeah, I like how you're like, "Oh, we've jumped around," and then you're talking about the last scene.
It's not the last scene. But what I'm saying, though, is that they find out that it's Martin kind of at the same time. And then as Daniel Craig goes to investigate his house, she is starting to come back to the shack.
Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff I want to talk about before that, though. You completely skipped over Swastika Cat.
Yeah, I was doing that mostly for Taylor's benefit.
I have a running joke, and it's partially sarcastic, but not really, that every time, specifically when David picks a movie, every time you pick a movie, there's a dead animal. And it's usually in the first like 7 minutes of the movie there's a dead animal. And so I yell at Alain every time, like, you need to warn me when there's a dead animal, but he can't sometimes because you chose the movie and he's never seen it. So this time he was like, I'm going to warn you right now. There's a dead animal in this movie. I'm going to tell you exactly when it happens so you can close your eyes.
So there's a website called Does the Dog Die? And you can basically look up any movie and it'll tell you exactly every single death of every single animal in that movie. And I know, big. So I was looking.
How long have you known about this?
I just found out about it because I was looking up Girl with Dragon Tattoo so I could tell you the exact minute marker on when we would see the swastika cat. And so that's how I found that. And that's why I was able to tell you, okay, babe, close your eyes now.
So this is the first time I realized the cat was in a swastika. I thought it was just being like, cut up in that way just to, anyway. It's obviously Martin doing that to throw suspicion off of him and onto Harold, I would assume, because he's like, that's the believable one, is that it was him. So we then find the woman who was on her honeymoon and we get that photo of the reverse, but unfortunately there's a balloon in front of Martin's face, so we can only see half of it and his little patch. In the other version you can see the full person, but it's just so pixelated because the picture's from 1966, so that's like more believable than this perfect photo. But there was a balloon in the way. And then at the same time Lisbeth goes back to get surveillance equipment and to go back and confront her former guardian again. But she gets the equipment to make sure that, no one can sneak in again after they killed the cat. But this is when Bloomquist gets shot at. He's like investigating the boathouse, and then he gets hit with a bullet, like grazed on his head, and he has to run away. And then this leads to the sex scene. Solid sex scene.
Don't say it like that.
I like how he's like, this is a bad idea. She's like, why? Quit talking.
I think, like I said before, it's all this groundwork has already been done between the relationship, and I think David is the one who said that she knows everything about him, so it's just an easier way to just trust someone when you know everything about them. And so, yeah.
I don't think that's true at all. I feel like if you don't know a person firsthand, all you know is all this research of them, and you know everything about their life, it's easy to like find the bad things about that person. You know what I mean? And focus on that because you don't know them personally.
But she didn't find any bad things.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is the fact that she liked him and wanted to be with him, especially after being wronged, and we saw how wronged she was in the movie, for her to trust him. He must have really been a nice guy because she went through his entire life.
Yeah, my favorite part of that scene, besides the sex scene, obviously, which they like really went for it, but is him just sitting on the bed talking to himself about how crazy this is and he was almost killed. And she's just like closing all the doors, looking out the windows, locking everything up, taking her pants off, getting the cameras ready, like doing all of this work to have sex. And then she just walks in and he's like not even paying attention. And she just pulls her pants off and he's just like, oh, like all this prep work she was doing. He's just like, oh, okay. One line that when she confronts her former guardian again that we didn't talk about is she's like, your last report was perfunctory. Your heart wasn't in it. I expect to see like a better report next time.
Maybe now that I'm thinking about it, is that maybe when Michaela's going, oh, this is a bad idea. Maybe he was like, oh, this is a bad idea because someone just left a dead cat in my doorway and like we're chasing a murderer. And so it's not like bad idea that we have sex, but it's a bad idea to have sex now. And the fact that she did put in all the prep work, she's like, nah, I took care of it, Chief. Like,
he said it's because he's older and they work together.
Yeah, he literally said why.
Moving on.
Yeah, maybe if you just, paid attention a little more.
Whatever.
So they go to Froda and Martin and are like, we need to look at the corporate records, and Froda doesn't want them to, and Martin's like, just let him do it. Henrik would have wanted them to. And then at this point, Lisbeth, like, she's not like the super smart, like, brainy, like she asks him, like, oh, what am I looking for? And he's like having to tell her what she's looking for. You know what I mean? Like every other time she's been like a step ahead of him, as like knowing what they need. And at this point she's like, I have no idea why you're sending me to look at these corporate records. And he's like, look for any connection to the sites and the women. And then he's like, and specifically everything about Froda, because at this point he thinks that's the bad guy and not Martin.
Right. I mean, that's what we're supposed to think too. But also he knows this case better than her. It's not so far-fetched that she would ask him, what should she be doing?
Right.
He's the one who's been doing the research. And the fact that all these women line up to the locations where they have their offices, that's Martin is the one who runs the offices.
Yeah. So we next get Daniel Craig goes to Harold because he's like, oh, he sees a picture of him with a camera. So he's like, oh, he was taking pictures. And he finds this one picture of a blurry boy wearing a blazer with a thing. And he's like, who's that? And Harold's like, oh, that's Gottfried's boy, Martin. What a useless fucking... Not realizing that Martin has killed so many more Jews than Harold has, and he's the Nazi. But this is like, at this point, Bloomquist has to know Martin's the bad guy, right? He sees this picture of him wearing the blazer, but then he goes back and he confirms it. He's like, oh yeah, that blazer has the patch on it, and so does the guy in the picture. And then he pulls the last murder, and it's I forget which name that was, Lena Anderson maybe, and she has the same emblem on her dress, which is I think why he killed her, because he knew her.
Okay, so that's a connection that I get. But just seeing Martin in the blurry boy photograph, why out of all the people in that photograph is he pointing him out? Like, why him?
He's wearing the same blazer as the kid that Harriet looked at across the street and was scared of. That's the connection. And also,
at this point, he wasn't trying to connect it. Well, hold on. At this point, he wasn't trying to connect it to the murders. He was just trying to connect it to Harriet's disappearance.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of this is figuring out what happened to Harriet. The murders are just tied to that because she was investigating it, and there's a serial killer, so they assume the serial killer killed Harriet and these girls, which is why at one point she's like, "Well, Harriet's not Jewish. Why is she connected to this?"
Okay, so then they find that one of the victims basically went to the same school as Martin, right?
So at that point, Martin did it, because Martin also he said he didn't arrive until 4:30, which means he couldn't have done anything wrong. But then he sees that Martin's wearing that blazer, and then the guy in the picture is wearing the blazer, and he's standing under a clock that shows it's before 4:30, and he said he came on the 4:30 train.
Right. The perfect clock photo.
Right. And so then at this point, Lisbeth is still trying to solve it, and on her end, and she is left the keys, and then she goes to get coffee, and then she comes back. But while she's doing this, Mikhail goes to Martin's house and is snooping around, and there's the way the music is playing, and it's the anxiety it's creating of him getting caught, and then Martin drives up. From this point until Martin dies is my favorite part of the movie.
No, mine too. But you forget to mention that there is someone lurking in the shadows of the library as Lisbeth is researching all this.
Well, sort of. So the security guard is going to warn Martin when she leaves because he's been asked to. I don't think there's anything nefarious about it. I think he's just my boss told me to tell me when this chick leaves.
But there's one scene where she's walking down the stack of the aisles of the books, and you see a shadowy figure zoop through.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't pay attention to that.
It's been a while since I saw the movie, and I thought, oh, did Martin I thought maybe we had like a time difference on what we were seeing to what happened. So I thought like maybe um, us seeing Martin pull up into his driveway while Daniel Craig was snooping in his house was like after the fact that he's already confronted Elizabeth in the library. But I think what we were supposed to think is that that was just the night guard checking that she was still there.
Yeah, and I think at one point you see him sort of walk away. So when Martin's like, that guard's going to tell me when she leaves, so then I'll just meet her at the shack and I'll grab her. But she just so happens to leave when the guard is on his like pee break or something. So Martin never gets the call.
Pretty great, actually.
So he falls in the bushes and Martin sees him out there and he's like, yeah, hey,
hello.
Why don't you come in? I wanted to ask you a question. And I love this version better than the other version because of the line later on when he's like, why did you come back in the house? He's like, why is the fear of offending so much greater than the fear of danger? Like, you knew I was the bad guy and that you came in here. And I like the way Martin is pouring the drinks and then just subtly looks it over and sees the knife missing. And even before that, he talks all this time about like, oh, I love to give my victims hope. So when he's like, why are you out in the woods without a flashlight? He throws him a flashlight and then 15 seconds later pulls out the gun.
Yeah.
Like, there's no need to give him the flashlight except to create this hope that, I might get out of this.
I think another element of that scene that I really like is that he already knew. He already knew it was Martin. He already had plenty of evidence to prove it was Martin. There was no reason for him to go to Martin's house for extra evidence. Like, he didn't need that. But because of what happened to him earlier in the movie, he felt the need to go back over and get even more evidence. And I think that was
he didn't even
detail.
find. There was nothing for him to...
until he was in the basement.
Right, well, no, that wasn't exactly his plan. Another thing, though, is that switch of conversation, he throws him the flashlight. But basically, Martin is just talking to him normal. And then all of a sudden, it's just like, boom. Like, just the charade curtain falls so fast that he's like, pretty sure he's in mid-sentence. And he's like, yeah, well, you're just walking through. So I'd really like my knife back. And then he pulls out the gun. It's just like this thing that just happens so abruptly that he can just turn it on and off in front of people so easily. It's creepy as hell.
I love when he's like, it's harder than making a shot is missing a shot. He's like, it was a good shot. And Daniel Craig says, it didn't work. I'm here. And he goes, Mikhail, it did work. You're here.
Yeah. It's great.
It's probably like my second favorite line in the entire movie. And then
so great.
He takes him in there, gasses him, chains them all up. And he, the whole thing about like, why didn't you just go home? And what do you know? What does Elizabeth know? And he keeps lying to him. He's like, you're lying. I know she's, there's a guard that's going to warn me when she leaves. And then he's just like toys with him. He's like, you're a journalist. Ask me, what did I do with the girls? He just wants to tell him. He wants to, like, we talk, when you listen about serial killers and like, they love to talk about themselves. It's why they get caught. The
You mean like The Incredibles with the villain monologue?
Yeah, that is exactly what I was talking about. Correct. No, I was talking about more like
monologuing again.
But he just like he's he talks about how like detail oriented he is and how like you have to be to like not get caught and to do this for so many years. And so this opportunity to talk to this guy and explain it to him, he probably does this to all his victims and explains to all of them like how great of a killer he is. And he's like, oh, I'm not like my father. I take him out to sea. He's like, and I love this moment right here where they know they're going to die and the hope drains from their eyes.
He's a real showboat, ain't he? And then Elizabeth comes in.
Oh, no. Oh, well, we're not done. Elizabeth hasn't gotten here yet.
He's really milking this scene. He really likes this scene.
We haven't even talked about Enya playing.
Oh, yeah. Enya.
Sail away, sail away, sail away. So apparently they were trying to figure out the music for this, and Daniel Craig's like, oh, we should play this song. I'm like, what do you mean, what song? And he goes and gets his phone and starts playing it, and they just all start laughing, like Fincher, Skarsgård, and him, and they're like, "Fuck it, yeah, let's use that song."
Because it's so, it takes you out of it, but it's also like, because it takes you out of it, knowing that this is the song that he listens to while killing his victims is also super creepy.
Well, and there's that one line too. He's like, the moment that the hope drains out of them, I feel myself getting hard. Just
Yeah.
such a fucking crazy line.
Wouldn't you say this is Fincher's most like sexually charged movie?
Yeah, yeah. And I was trying to, I still think like his most kind of fucked up sexually, movie, like the one scene from Seven where they show the outfit the dude wore with the knife
Yeah.
is still like the fucking craziest thing to me, and you don't even see that. But yeah, I can agree with
But
you.
I feel like, well, that's one scene of Seven. This whole movie has like reoccurring themes and scenes throughout it. That's like up there,
Yeah. The only other couple things I want to talk about before Elizabeth shows up is, he's like, he mentions Harriet, and he's like, "You found Harriet?" And he's like, "What do you mean? You killed her?" And he's like, "You useless fucking detective." And then he puts the bag over his head because he's like, "I don't want to hear you talk anymore." And then he's like going up to him. He pulls the thing down. He's like, the pause he gives, and he's like, "I've never had a man down here before." And he's like, "I've never even touched a man besides my father." And it kind of shows you like how like this can be handled well, that as opposed to like the old boy scene where he's like, "Daddy." You have
Right.
this where he's just like, "It was our duty to do that for our father." And then she comes in with the golf club to the face.
So, okay, so it was established that he molested both of them, right?
Godfrey did, yeah. I think that's
Yeah.
in this movie, that's the scene that establishes it is him saying, it was our duty to do that for him. My favorite line in this movie, which first of all, Skarsgård runs out and Daniel Craig's like, "Oh, the gun's over there." I was like, couldn't Skarsgård just like hit a button and lock that door and they're just stuck down there and he could then gas them again? Like, but I guess he was so fucked up from the golf club to the face that he just like took off. But my favorite line is she bends over Daniel Craig and she says, "May I kill him?" Like basically,
Yeah.
like, "Will you unleash me?" He just shakes his head yes. And I just think like so much around that line of like it's not like she's like asking like it's like permission, but really she's just like, "Are you going to think less of me if I do this? Like, do you want me to do this? Like, I really want to do this, please." And he's like, "Yes, you can do this."
Yeah. And something you can just see like the dial, the switch flip in her, and she's just so focused on killing this dude. Like the spin out on her motorcycle as she's like chasing him down in the car. So great. And I thought it was real poetic how he dies off of the bridge that kind of caused all this in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. A fire on that bridge. Yeah. At least it didn't block the bridge. Like traffic could keep going,
That's important. That's important. Yeah, and then there is like 40 minutes left of this movie.
It is. It's a weird way to do it, but I actually really like it. So one, they're talking. Well, first of all, we get a little backstory of her about how she like tried to kill her father, which is like the second movie, The Girl That Played with Fire, like gets all into that. But then he's like start talking about Harriet, and I love the so they bug her, and he goes to tell Anita like, "Hey, Martin's dead." And so then they're like, "Oh, she's gonna call Harriet, and that's how we'll find Harriet." But she just like does online shopping, plays solitaire, and then the only reason she hasn't called Harriet, Elizabeth is like, is because she's dead. And then they're like having sex, and he's like, "Oh, I just had a thought," and she's like, "1 second, like don't talk." And then afterwards, he's like, "I know why." And then you figure out that like this has been Harriet the whole time, and it's like such a cool reveal. And
It's
Alain, do you know where we've met that actress that plays Harriet before? What movie we've done?
ah. Oh, I know she looks familiar. Was it one of Bombeck's?
Well, no, maybe it was that Paul W.S. Anderson space movie that you made us do for with the guy from Jurassic Park.
Event Horizon?
It was Event Horizon. Yeah, she's like one of the people in Event Horizon.
Oh, she is, isn't she? She's the like the blonde, the only blonde on the crew.
Yeah, she looks
Which
like
one was
herself. Yeah.
Event Horizon. Was that the weirdly edited?
Where they go to hell.
Yes.
They go
Where
to
the
space.
ship goes to hell.
Oh my gosh, that was hilarious.
No
It's
animals
Sam
harmed in that one.
Yeah, just a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh wow.
I love the scene with Harriet though, explaining everything, right? Like, I mean,
What
obviously
did
she's
you
explaining
did
a
you
lot of
think of that?
trauma.
Well, yeah. What did you think of that reveal, Taylor?
I loved it. I mean,
Did you see it coming or?
No. So I knew that Harriet was still alive, and I pretty much knew fairly early on that it had to be Martin, but I did not see at all that she was Harriet. I thought that was really, really smart the way they did that, and the way that the sister, it was like as she was dying or something, she said, "I want you to do this," or something like it was, she orchestrated the whole thing basically, which I thought
No, it was her maiden name. Didn't she, because she renewed her passport, or she had a passport and an ID, one with her maiden name and one with her married name.
Yeah, so she had her husband take her out on the married passport, and then she came out on her maiden name passport, and they just lived in the UK together.
That's right. That's right.
The scene where she's explaining that like she killed Godfrey, and then she looks up and Martin's just standing there, and like the flashback of it is so kind of haunting. And
Like
then her
she should have taken both of them out.
well, I don't know. I mean, she should have just told Henrik, And then just like the whole flashback of her getting out and explaining it all. You feel like the police should have found her. She was just like hiding in a barn, but whatever. And then Harriet and Henrik reunite. It's like a very touching scene. It's very touching, and then like Elizabeth just like walks away, like, I don't need to watch this. I can't handle this.
Yeah, no, it is. And now there's still 30 minutes of the movie left.
There's like 15. Basically, it's just the takedown of Venestrom, and Elizabeth steals like $2 billion of his money, and like then he gets killed by like the gun runners in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
That was so random. I felt like that whole scheme could have been a whole movie on its own, and it's just 8 minutes of just her in a wig going around just taking all this guy's money.
I like the small details too, though, of like her dumping her jewelry here and her throwing the wig off the train, and like she's wearing gloves the entire time, and then at one point she takes a sip of coffee and sees her lipstick and wipes it off. She's like leaving no trace of herself. I like all of that. I think is really good. And then she goes back to give him. It's funny. She uses his $50,000 to make this happen. Gives him back his money, but just like none of the $2 billion she stole. Instead, she like just buys him this really nice leather jacket, I guess.
Only for the final fuck you of the movie for her to see that he is still with Robin Wright at the end of it.
Yeah, it's kind of messed up. He just sort of like leaves her. You know what I mean? It's like pretty fucked up from him to do that to her.
I thought about this for several days after watching the movie because it bothered me so much, because I was trying to figure out why would he do that? Because the other woman, she is still married. Like, he knows that is going nowhere, and he kind of means nothing to her. He's like the side piece to her. And why wouldn't he choose this girl who knows everything about him And despite that, and some of it because of, actually cares about him and actually likes him
and chooses to be with him.
and chooses to be with him, and knowing everything about him. And he still chooses the other woman. And I feel like, I don't know, I can't see that as being any other way other than like an insecurity thing
for him.
Yeah, that he
It's
knows that she knows everything about him.
Well, and this is not the woman I'm supposed to be with, right? I'm supposed to, she's younger and she's like punk and she's like not accepted by society. And so it's like this older woman who's my editor, she's more my age, is like more acceptable. What's funny too is like from Lisbeth's perspective, she's wearing her hair more normally. She's going to her former guardian, the one that had the stroke, and is like, I'm finally happy. I'm with this person. I have a friend. She goes to like buy him this nice jacket. She's like trying to become a more acceptable person for him. And then she sees this, fucking throws the jacket away and just like rides off. And in a really disappointing, like the fact that we're never going to get to see the rest of the story, because I think it would have set up well, and having Fincher do it. But it is sad that it ends that way on that note.
Do you know why they didn't make the sequels?
The box office for this was kind of disappointing, and then like he was working on it. And,
I'm sorry. I went to see this twice. Okay? Twice.
Yes, I mean your $20 probably wasn't
I don't
enough.
go to see movies twice just so that they can be, not their sequels to not be made. I went to see fucking Endgame 5 times, and in second place, this movie twice. Okay?
Well, you know what? So this made, I think I read up on this a while ago. What I read recently said it wasn't, it was disappointing. This had an estimated $90 million budget and grossed $232 million worldwide. That's like enough to get the sequels. I think he was working on them for a while, and then he just moved on to other stuff. So I read some interesting things. Like, so first of all, Rooney Mara like had to really fight for this part, and like one of the things she did after she got it is she got all the piercings legitimately for this. And after she was done filming, she took all of them out except the nipple piercing. But she's like, if we do the sequels, I don't want to have to redo this because of how painful it was.
Wow, that's some commitment.
That's dedication.
Do you know who originally was going to get this part?
The Elizabeth part?
Yeah.
Who?
Natalie Portman.
Huh.
Wow.
She fits like physically and like the looks wise, she fits the bill, but I don't think she has the tenacity of it.
I don't know. I mean, did you see her in V for Vendetta? I can totally see her taking this part by storm, but I'm really glad that it was Rooney Mara.
Yeah, I could see it. I agree. I could see it, but I'm glad Rooney Mara got it.
So, I mean, overall, I like this movie. Obviously, I went to see it in theaters twice.
He just wants one more reason to mention that he saw it in theaters twice.
But it is painfully obvious to me that I am the one that knows the least about this movie.
Insert every movie we've done.
Hey, that's not true. That's not true. Because I didn't see every movie twice in theaters, okay? Look, the point I'm trying to make, though, is that at least with the plot, being so intricate, it was hard for me to keep up, even though, like, I really like this movie. Like, I really love how the mystery unfolds about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love this one. There are obviously certain parts of it that are hard to watch. I do think they like add to the overall story, though. But I just think the mystery is so well done. I think the acting is so well done. And yeah, it's like one of my bigger disappointments that we never got the sequels for this. Like, I think it just would have been like, I trust Fincher to do that well. So that's like the only downside of this.
I like to imagine that this that the sequel to this movie was Knives Out. And that's why the one guy who died in Knives Out, didn't he want Daniel Craig in like the event of something? He wanted Daniel Craig to investigate his death. Wasn't that like part of his thing? So it's like he knew him already from this, and everything that Daniel Craig knows in Knives Out and all of his skills that he has for investigating, he learned from Elizabeth. That's what I like to think.
I can see it.
Overall, did you enjoy the movie?
I really enjoyed it. It was something that, like I said before, after watching it, I thought about it for several days. It's definitely something that sticks with you. I don't know that I'd ever want to watch it again because it's very traumatizing, but really, really good movie.
Well, thanks for listening to another episode of I Finally Watched. This is David.
And this is Alain.
And this is Taylor. And I finally watched The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.